inner voice. A heartfelt chat with Dr. Foojan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. This is a Heartfelt Chat with Dr. Foojan podcast. It's so great to be with you today. I'm Dr. Foojan Zeine, a psychotherapist, author, and the originator of the awareness integration theory. And our conversation is about what matters most in our life, our minds, our thoughts, feelings, actions, relationships, and our fulfillment in this beautiful journey of life. For all of you beautiful souls who have been asking for our latest book, I wanted to share with you what's out there for you and which book would be of interest to you. So the first one is intentional parenting, and it could be for international parents. This book is a practical guide to awareness integration theory with my amazing co-authors, Dr. Nicole Jaffari and Dr. Eileen Manoukian. They're both experts in child development, early development, and all the way to young adult. And this is what we've done actually in this book, Intentional Parenting. This is for parents, this is for educators, this is for teachers, this is for everyone who, one way or another, is having to experience raising their children. And we go through chapters from infancy all the way to young adulthood and go through every same kind of age group and give you cognitive development, emotional development, motor skills development, things that you could be looking forward to and seeing what is needs to occur, and then how to parent from the awareness integration path so that it raises emotionally intelligent children and independent and the children who can be accountable and responsible for what's going on with them. So it's a very impactful book for you to have. Now, the other book that's been out for a while, it's actually the book for therapists and coaches who are interested in learning how to do the awareness integration therapy or coaching with their clients. It's Clear the Past, Create a New Future, and Live a Fulfilled Life. And this has been forwarded by Dr. Jeffrey Zeig. It's a great book that takes you through all the phases, the 6 phases of the awareness integration path that you can actually work with your clients as you like. And we also have certification programs that it would be wonderful for you to become part of our group, because Foojan app is coming out, and we like to have a lot of our providers certified psychotherapists across the world, coaches across the world, to be able to take the same type of awareness integration therapy and work with people who are going to be working with Foojan app. In this episode, I'm so excited to chat with 2 sisters. Ronni Tichenor was a Ph.D. in sociology, specializing in family studies from the University of Michigan, and Jennie Weaver, who received her degree from Vanderbilt School of Nursing and is a board-certified family nurse practitioner with over 25 years of experience in family practice and mental health. Their new book, Healing Begins With Us: Breaking the Cycle of Trauma and Abuse and Rebuilding the Sister Bond, shares their inspiring and hopeful story of healing from their painful upbringing. And you can get their book at ronnieandjennie.com, ronnieandjennie.com. We had an amazing conversation, very in-depth, and just sharing about what they went through. I share about some of the things that I had experienced. And I think that I'm positive you will enjoy this podcast as much as I did. Subscribe to this podcast, subscribe to my YouTube channel, connect with me through any of the website or any of the social media. If you are a person who likes doing self-help book, then please get Life Reset, the awareness integration path to the life you want. And this is available for you on my website, foojanzeine.com, or you could get it from Amazon. And I think that you can go through the process. At this point, this book is being taught in Cal State University, Long Beach. We've done a lot of study with with people who've gone through the book and have done the journaling, and we've alleviated some of the research has shown just by doing the work with this book, their depression and anxiety minimized around 67%. So I really hope that you get to enjoy this book as much as I've seen others really go through and experience the book and go through their life patterns. And obviously, if you do need to work with people, then they will be also available for you, therapists and coaches who can take your process and go a little bit deeper. So without further ado, here are Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver for you, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as I have. Well, welcome, ladies. Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver, two sisters who wrote this beautiful book, Healing Begins with Us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
So much. It's good to be here.
with you.
Definitely. It's a wonderful book. It really shares the two of you. There has every chapter, it has excerpts from what you shared, what you went through, and how your life evolved in the family, but more than anything, how your friendship beyond your sisterhood was part of the healing, sharing. And I'm so grateful for the two of you to share this experience. I come from a family where my father was an alcoholic, and we have stepsisters or half sisters and brothers from different moms, which we've come together as grown-ups. And it was so interesting that at one point I was sitting with my older brother and the younger brother, all from three different moms, same dad, but three different eras of my father. And as we were sitting together, we all looked like we have never met the man you say it was your father, because all of these decades, this man was so different that each one of us knew him as completely another human being, right? So, and we all went through this conversation about, wow, like we've lived with a person, and then, one is in denial because they were having fun with him, one was suffering. One, met him, was in his life when he was completely out of the alcohol, but completely depressed, like he hadn't worked on himself. He just went into a huge depression. So as I was going over your book, it really resonated with me in so many layers. So, so first, I just wanted to thank you, and then share with me what was the process of going and creating this book. And then from there, we'll go obviously back to the content of what was stated in the book and how it was for you and your family.
Sure. Well, it's something that we have talked about for a long time, writing a book together. And it took a while for me anyway to see how we could do that, because I've done a lot of writing on my own as an academic. And I couldn't imagine what it would be like for one of us to sit with a laptop on our laps and be trying to, wordsmith one sentence after another. And it wasn't until we started our podcast about 3 years ago where we had these conversations about our family and just all kinds of topics, things we've learned along the way. And I could see how it could come together. I could see how we could tell our story in a book in a way very similar to what we did in the podcast. So much of the book, most chapters have these extensive conversations or dialogue between Jennie and me, where we're just talking about what it felt like. And it's funny the way you began this conversation. We are the opposite in that there are three of us. I'm the oldest, Jennie's the youngest, there's a brother in between, and there's less than 3 years between the three of us. So we are compact in terms of the time space in which our parents parented us. But because of the different roles we had in the family, with me being the hero, Jennie being the scapegoat, our brother being kind of the middle, classic invisible child, we did have different parents too, but because they were pushing us to behave in particular ways to conform to the expectations of these roles. So, and some of that does come out in the book where I'm talking about various things, and Jennie will say, well, that was for you, Ronni, that's true for you. That wasn't true for me. And so it really is amazing how, as they say, no individual has the same parents, right? Even if they're siblings, no two people have the same parents. And it's true. It's even more true for, I think, dysfunctional families where there's so much else going on in those dynamics.
Absolutely. I'm a therapist and I work with addiction for almost 30 years, and the families who go through this. And that is so true that each child and even the mate takes on particular standard roles. And then everybody feeds that role until someone finally says, I don't think so. And I think, Jennie, you were the one who played that role, right?
Yes, as the scapegoat, it was my job to receive all of the family pain and kind of be the garbage can for the family. It was all kind of dumped on me. And so it was it was a very painful place to be, to always being told you're not enough, you're not good enough, you're a failure, you're lazy or stupid or an embarrassment or whatever the garbage is that at the moment that the parents or the other siblings want to dump on you. And so it's a place of living with constant pain and rejection. And it is a tough place to live. And I think for the scapegoat, and I also later kind of took on some of the mascot tendencies in my teenage years, learning to use humor to diffuse the tension and hopefully, skirt another explosion or possibly physical abuse. So I think when you grow up with that, you either keep asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Or you say, I need to figure this out. I need to find out what is wrong with me. Why am I hurting so much? Or you numb it. You find ways to, maybe maladaptively cope with it, right? And that can be experimenting with alcohol, drugs, food, any number of things to try to numb that pain. And so I tried certainly following in my father's footsteps and experimented with alcohol in my teens and decided, yeah, that's not the way I want to go. So after a while, it was getting that big, why do I feel this way? Why am I so unhappy? And how can I fix this? And asking that big question of how can I fix this in counseling is what started unwrapping or peeling away the layers of the onion. And it was like, oh, I wasn't born a mess. This was pushed on me. This was dumped on me. And unwrapping all of that denial is tough to do. Definitely.
Very much. One of the major feelings and states that are there for people who live within an addiction system is anxiety. And I think people take on anxiety in a different way. So for example, in a hero, like at least you take on anxiety because you can do stuff. So, it releases anxiety. We feel kind of in control, but it's stemming from that. And sometimes the role of the scapegoat is being bombarded with all the anxiety and has no idea how to cope with that. And then it becomes like sometimes in a destructive level. I remember this conversation because two of my brothers also became addicts, hardcore addicts. Another brother went into different aspects. But me and my sister were talking, and she says, everybody's, all of the male in our, like the role models that after our father and became that. I wonder how come the two of us are not an addict. I said, I was an addict. I smoked cigarette for 35 years and then changed it to food and then go back and forth. And she said, I don't know then how come I'm not an addict? I'm like, trust me, your anxiety, the level of the way that you show anxiety and it goes into rage, that is your addiction. Like your addiction is into anxiety and rage and anxiety and rage, and that's how you show it. But it shows up in every one of us who's in that family somehow, unless you're, like you said, you're aware, you go into the system of healing, and you really come out of the denial and look at how it had impacted you in that way. So Ronni, how did it impact you in the way that you, because you were the elder and you took on the role of the hero, how did it impact you in life? Let's say, I would even call it like positive and negative.
Right. So, yeah, so the hero is the one that all the family's hopes and dreams are pinned on. And my function as a hero was to distract, but in a much different way than Jennie, right? They could sort of deflect and say, oh, all of our problems are really Jennie's fault. She's really the problem. For me, it was, if anyone was to look at the family and say, criticize our parents for who they are as people or the kind of parents they are, they could point to me, this ultra high achieving child, and say, look, there can't possibly be anything wrong with us because we created this great kid. So I was a straight A student. I was talented musically. I started taking piano lessons at the age of 4. I took them for 10 years. I sang in all the musical groups at school. I sang the leads in school musicals, just all this stuff. And it was, I remember when I was writing about it in the book, I got like 2 paragraphs into talking about what it was like to be the hero and kind of listing, not even a complete list, but just, kind of the highlights of the things that I did as a child that were, that I excelled and was recognized for that. And I just started bawling. I had to stop and have a good cry because it was like, and it wasn't that these things weren't enjoyable in and of themselves, at least some of them. It wasn't that I didn't take pride in them on my own. It was the pressure, right? I felt the pressure to be successful in that way. And so I struggled with perfectionism for a very, very, very long time. And then for years, I called myself a recovering perfectionist because the tendencies were still there. And now it's remnants. I really still don't like to be wrong. But I will accept it. I will accept that it's possible for me to be wrong. Jennie's laughing because she's watched the evolution, right? I don't have to be in control of everything all the time, which I used to have to be, right? So it's this unwinding. I know one of the first things that we tried early in our recovery process, besides counseling that Jennie mentioned, and reading everything we get our hands on alcoholic or homes with addiction and homes with abuse in them, was trying Al-Anon and adult children of alcoholics. And I remember, if it wasn't the first meeting, it was one of the very first meetings I went to. And they said, if it took you 30 years to get to this point, it will take you 30 years to unwind it. I thought, oh, that is really bad news. I did not want to hear that. But it's true, right? You have these behavior patterns and these ways of reacting to things, these emotions that have been conjured up and squashed and maybe come out sideways. I mean, you've got all these patterns that you're trying to unwind slowly, and it takes time to create those new patterns and to let go of the ones that are no longer serving you. And that took me a while to sort of get to, is that early on I saw these as, my character flaws, and I knew I was being too hard on myself, and then I would catch myself doing that and I berate myself for being too hard on myself, and it was just this silly never-ending cycle. And I finally got to the point of, you're gonna have a lifelong process of letting go of the things that aren't serving you anymore. It's like, thank you for keeping me safe or making me feel like I was safe, but this is no longer helping me. It's actually getting in my way of living the way I want to live. And so I need to let that go, think consciously about trying to do something different, all of that. So it does. I mean, some roles obviously are more desirable than others. The scapegoat is by far the worst. But they all have their pain. They all have their patterns that they tend to generate, and they all have their challenges in trying to step out of them.
Absolutely. Everyone, please get this book. It's a wonderful book. It's Healing Begins with Us, Breaking the Cycle of Trauma and Abuse and Rebuilding the Sibling Bond. by Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver. Jennie, when you think about the pressure, the amount of pressure that was on you and going through the anxiety and then trying to kind of cope with it the best ability that you had, and some of it went back to the role modeling that you had. What was your process that you finally said enough is enough, and then this blast came in, or you decided to share and change and shift?
I think it started when I married a really wonderful man who was very loving and supportive. Um, that was one of the healthiest relationships as an adult that I'd ever had. And then starting down the road of becoming parents, I knew that I wanted my children to have a better start in life. I had already been through some personal counseling, but I was still struggling with the denial that that we were an alcoholic family, and all the while I was also going to school. I had started to school down that path, and taking all of those psychology courses and really human lifespan and development, and talking about the addicted family dynamics. Our first daughter was around a year, maybe 18 months old when I took that class, and I was sitting in that class saying, that's my family. Ronnie's the hero. I'm the scapegoat. Our brother's the invisible child. And so all of those roles, and I identified that I took on some of the mascot roles as a teenager to try to deflect some of the rage in our home. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. And it was really, it still took time for me to have the courage to speak about it with Ronnie. It took time because our relationship was just starting to develop. We were just starting to talk to each other about parenting and how we wanted to parent differently. So we weren't quite out of our denial yet. And it was really probably a year later, or maybe even a year and a half later, when our dad was too inebriated at 11 o'clock in the morning to drive Ronnie to the airport for her flight, that I said, Ronnie, Dad's an alcoholic. We're an alcoholic family, and that was kind of the turning point for one of the many turning points, actually. But it really, I just lived with this chronic anxiety, not knowing that that's what it was, like I was in a pressure cooker all the time. And that's how I identify that I'm checking back in with that anxiety, or feeling that anxiety, is I just feel pressure building up, especially in my heart, in my chest. And I think when you live with it, you're born into this. You're pushed into, pigeonholed into a role to play from toddlerhood on. You don't know any different. And so waking up from that huge mountain of denial, it comes in layers. And I can't say enough how grateful I am that I had this amazing older sister who saw my pain, recognized that I was struggling, and opened that door a little bit to allow me to be vulnerable and for us to start chipping away at the denial. And it's scary. It's scary when you start talking about it, when you start naming it. And it's really hard to do it on your own. I will say, I was in counseling talking about this stuff and thinking, God, I'm just starting to have this relationship with my sister. How do I talk to her about this without like blowing her mind, and blowing up the relationship? And so I think it was a great mercy and a great gift that she was a little receptive to hearing it. And the more we talked, she became more receptive. And the more vulnerable I was with her, and the more vulnerable she was with me, that trust just began to bloom. And so did our healing.
Beautiful. And Ronnie, how was it for you to open this path with Jennie? Because it seems like you had Jennie going through this process also brought for you the opening and going through the denial and looking at, your addiction was the perfectionist a part of that, and working on yourself. But then as you opened this path, how did your relationship change with Jennie? Like at the beginning, I'm assuming how you were saying was like you needed to control not only, you also had the role of the controlling your sibling. So you
Mhm.
had become, this agent of the family to also carry the message and, have everybody be perfect. And to shift that aspect of as Jennie just said, this allowance, allowing her to be who she is, not needing to be perfect. And the other side is perfect as is.
Right.
Oh,
Right.
how was that for you? What was that process?
So, so this whole sort of breaking out of the denial probably went on for about 3 or 4 years. From the first time she and I had the conversation where she was honest with me about the pain that she was in, to this, the infamous too drunk to drive me to the airport experience that we had with our dad. And it was hard for me to open up to that completely. I mean, I was able to see that she was in pain and that our parents were hurting her, and I wanted that to stop. But I also, part of the denial is often the creating of this myth about what's really happening in the family. So in our family, it was this: we are this close, warm, loving, happy family. And all of those things, right? Close, warm, loving, happy. And so to admit that things were as bad as they were meant that the myth was exactly that. And things were so bad for Jennie, and this one for at least a year, might have been longer, that she would say to me, because she was living near her parents and I was living farther away. So she was getting, and she's not just a scapegoat, she was getting constant doses from them of cruel and brutal behavior. And she would say to me, I can't take this anymore. I'm gonna walk out of here and I'm never gonna come back. I'm like, no, please, please, please don't do that. Please don't please don't destroy our warm, close, loving, happy family. And as the hero, I can do anything. As the hero, our parents would listen to me more than they would anybody else. I could make a rational argument that they couldn't undercut, even if they didn't like it. And so I was kind of playing on those traits that I had to try to keep things together. Let's really be who we say we are as a family. My parents will sort of make some concessions along the way, enough to keep me still trying to keep everything happening. And, finally we got to the point where that too drunk to drive me to the airport incident, she says, Dad's an alcoholic. And even then I said, well, I mean, and we did behave in a terrible, abusive, ugly way that whole morning. And I saw it, I acknowledged it, but I wouldn't say he was an alcoholic. I said, he abuses alcohol sometimes. And she sort of rolled her eyes at me like, come on, we've been using that euphemism for a while now. We know it's not true anymore. It's not true. So she had to drag me kicking and screaming to that acknowledgement. And it was only because we had begun to have this relationship where we talked to each other. And that's really important. As a therapist, you'll be familiar with the phrase triangular communication, where you've got one person who tries to keep a lid on everything in the family. All information flows through them so that they can make sure the truth doesn't get out. And that was our mother. So even as we got to be in our 20s and early 30s, and this is the days before cell phones and long distance calls were expensive and so on. So we would call home once a week dutifully to talk to our parents living far away from them. But we did not call each other. We did not talk to each other. Even if one of us was in the room, our mother would never put us on the phone. We were not allowed / encouraged to talk to each other. So, it wasn't until we did have this time when we decided, well, we both have children. We want to have each other for support as we're raising our children, where we start talking to each other. And so that's what did it, was that little bit of an opening of a direct line of communication. And then once that, as Jennie said, she allowed herself to be vulnerable and open up even more. I mean, it was obvious she was just tormented by her parents, just ridiculously hammered by them continuously. no business having kids, you're a terrible mother, you should divorce your husband, you've made a complete mess out of your life. I mean, on and on and on and on and on. And I wasn't treated that way. I mean, they found other ways to hurt me, but I wasn't treated that way. I'm not the scapegoat, Jennie was. So it was just really, it was the fact that we actually did start talking to each other, even if it was just a little bit, that opened the door, a crack, and then allowed us, and then everything, right? All bets were off. Eventually, everything that we had tried to hide, that we were in denial about, you just couldn't do it anymore.
Mm. Well, everyone, go to the book. Healing Begins with Us, Breaking the Cycle of Trauma and Abuse and Rebuilding the Sibling Bond by Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver. Jennie, were you able to ever confront your parents or share with them? Or at one point, I mean, I think the book is pretty open about what it, what the two of you have shared, but was there a time that you needed to take a stand for yourself after healing and sharing some things with them?
There, as in a lot of abusive relationships, because there was not just the addiction, but there was intergenerational trauma abuse on every level. And just trying to name what the problems were caused our parents to spiral out of control. I was the target of their rage, and that never changed. They confronted me multiple times. They stalked me, confronted me at church, wrote ugly letters, phone calls, all of it. I did try to answer their questions as calmly as I could. Unfortunately, they were never reasonable. They were never rational. They were really just psychological attacks. So at when, and this was after Ronni and I, in the book, we talk about the intervention that we attempted with our father together. So even after that, the abuse didn't stop. I was still targeted, and for, sadly, we just had to cut contact. After a while, I just said, I've done everything I can to try to answer your questions. You've called me, you've screamed and cursed at me and called me names, and this is going to stop. And so I didn't respond to their mail. I would send it back. After a while, I quit reading it. The phone calls, I didn't answer the call. We did, after a number of years, Ronni and I attempted to go see them at their home. They had invited us, so we went, hoping, against all common sense, that things may have changed. Maybe we could have just limited contact, but it was during that visit that they exploded again and just dumped rage on us and told us that we were dead to them and to leave their home and never come back. So through the years, they have continued to occasionally will send an ugly postcard, or they actually stalked me again. I moved 1,000 miles away, and they followed me to the small town where my family had moved. So there still is just tremendous mental illness there, and it's not something that is in my power to fix. And Ronni and I have talked about this in our book. You can forgive others to the best of your ability as a human, but reconciliation requires both parties to be able to agree on what the problems are and to make changes in each of our individual behaviors. And when you're dealing with someone who is an abuser, who is severely mentally ill, you can't fix them. And the best thing you can do for your own healing is to step out of range and stay out of range. And that is what I chose to do to give my children a better start in life, and to allow myself to heal and to live in peace.
Right.
I know that there's I've also counseled a lot of the parents where their children at one point, just like yourself, has opened their eyes, and they're in the phase of rage because they're going to counseling. And for example, one of the things that happens in therapy is that as we become aware of things, obviously we tap into not only the powerlessness experiences, but also our strength. And many times our strength shows up as our rage, because that's the way we need to take a stand for ourselves. That rage sometimes then gets communicated to the parents from obviously a blame, and then take it as blame position versus let's look at what the issue is. Each parent goes to the area of, I've done the best I knew, and that's all I could do, and you don't understand what I went through, and many times it's because there's so much in it, and it's very hard for them to see that although maybe they didn't do this obviously in the intention to hurting their children, but it did hurt, and that then it becomes like a personal attack, as is like, I don't know anything else to do. Now, the same conversation of the denial continues, and it takes a long time sometimes for parents also to break that denial. And that's only if they choose also go to therapy and look at those angles and maybe come out of the denial and maybe can handle, responsibility without necessarily holding a blame, but hold the responsibility without the blame. And it's a process, and not every parent has the ability to go through that process, unfortunately. And then they go through the experience of like, how dare you? We've done so much for you. We've done da 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 da. And you guys are both parents, and you know how much it takes, a parent to go through parenting and what they do. So they see the part that they've done with a good intention, but not necessarily also see that, without the intention of harming, that there is harm that has gotten created. And then the vicious cycle of kind of like blame and attack kind of continues. And I can see how that has continued in your family.
Well, we do know that they had their own traumas, and we do have compassion for what they experienced. We know some of it. They have shared things with us over the years. We did not share those things in the book because that wasn't our story to tell. So there is more to their story, certainly. The thing, I guess what we kept coming back to is that we were as clear as we could be as we were coming out of our own process of, breaking through the denial and so on, about what they were, like, as Jennie said, we tried to explain what we felt the problems were in our family growing up and make connections to what they had told us about their own families. We tried to make, give them opportunities to talk about, make it clear to them what we were still upset about, and give them opportunities to address those issues. And they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So they I mean, we weren't even talking about the past, just what's happening right now in this moment. Can you stop doing these things to Jennie in particular? That was our main concern. It's the way they're treating Jennie. We're not doing anything to Jennie that's a problem. And and then of course, as we look back at our childhood, the things that they did, they hid. They did not do them in front of other people. And so to us, that meant they knew on some level what they were doing was wrong, even in the moment. And so those are the places where we hold them accountable. And yes, we did get in touch with some rage that we had suppressed over the way we've been treated as children, but not in our conversations with them, because we knew that would never get us anywhere. So we were as calm and reasonable as we could be in talking to them. Did not yell, did not curse. They felt very free to do that to us. And so we felt like there wasn't anything else we could think of to do to try to bring them along. As you said, for some people, and this is kind of where we've landed, is that there's been so much that's happened to them. We think that we know there's some mental illness there, in addition to the choices they made around abuse and addiction. And we've kind of come to the place where we feel like if they were to admit that they did anything wrong, like this whole house of cards would come tumbling down, and they would lose who they are, or just be so disoriented that they couldn't continue. I mean, that's kind of where we landed, is that they just can't, for whatever reason. But all these years, anytime, like I've had times where my father, usually not my mother, will reach out to me. And anytime they have, I will take the call or I will call them back to see where they are, right? To take their temperature, or have things changed for them? Do they want to talk through some of these things with a different perspective? And sadly, it's been over 25 years. And every time I've tried to meet them, when they ask to talk, there hasn't really been any change. So
I do agree with you that there's a ego structure that has been built, and your whole sense of being is attached to that ego structure. And if anything kind of tries to crack it, then you're nobody, then you have no idea who you are. And the anxiety becomes so much. And imagine that the anxiety is already underneath the whole concept of the addiction and the addiction process. And maybe your mom's whole existence is also related to your father. One of the things that I see a lot in the dynamic of addictions between couples is that the person who's an addict, their favorite, they're married to their drug of choice, and then the person who's married to them is also addicted now to their drug of choice, is the person who is an addict. So it becomes this concept that their whole level of being is attached to the person who's an addict, and getting how to be attached to them, because the person who's an addict is not attached to anybody except their drug of choice. So it's an interesting dynamic that I've watched 30 years with couples who one of them is an addict. So I could see that this is a process that could really, be that is hard. Sometimes the only time that I've seen this break is when the addict does something, or the alcoholic does something to the person directly, which suddenly it's like, oh my God, like they're even betraying me. And, somehow this breaks. But until the person who's an addict holds the concept, the codependence continues in a very, very, enmeshed level. And then anybody who attacks that concept, it's going to be shunned away. So I can see, and unfortunately, if the addiction is still creates a functional life, it's hard to break it. You usually until it creates a complete non-functional life, and there's nobody else who can help it and bring it out. Sometimes the denial has to break, but as long as there's still some sort of functionality, it continues. I've seen this pattern hopefully end sometimes before the parents are dying. Like, sometimes it's almost like as you're coming to the end and you got to let go of that ego, suddenly the ego crashes and says, maybe I just need to ask for forgiveness or relate and connect. So sometimes that happens, and sometimes that doesn't, and we have to complete our relationship after their death. Like with my father, I had to actually complete my relationship with him after he passed away, and not during the time that he was alive. And that was the time that after he passed away, all the siblings sat together and were, everyone was like now sharing their reality with each other. And it was so interesting that each person was trying to forgive for completely something else, but it also came about, well, wow, each one of us had such a different father at that time,
Right.
to be able to do that. Jennie, how are you in the process of forgiveness?
I think I've forgiven my parents, many years ago. It's, we are able to look back on some of the family traditions that we did at holidays, and I certainly have carried those on for my children. I mean, I have 4 grown children now, between the age of 24 and 32, and 3 grandchildren, and so I'm able to share, some funny memories, or like I said, some of the family traditions that we embrace at Christmas and Easter. And so I think as far as forgiveness, I don't harbor any hatred or anger at all. I have great, as Ronni said, I have tremendous compassion for them. We realize, we're very, very aware that this type of trauma is intergenerational trauma. It's learned, much of it is learned behavior. Um, but we also have a choice as individuals. We are not doomed to create the same dynamics. And so Ronni and I made very conscious effort and choices to marry someone very different from our father, to create a marriage relationship that's very different from what was role modeled for us, and to parent very differently than we were parented. And it was really the desire to love and nurture our children and to be as conscious parents as we could, while we were recovering and healing, is what motivated and accelerated our recovery and our connection with each other.
Beautiful. You have written some specific steps, and I wanted to read it for people. One, you said, in order to connect, is to recognize the roles that had been forced upon us. 2, acknowledge that our relationships could be better. 3, agree that making it better was a shared goal. 4, communicate directly with each other in all things. And 5, see each other with new eyes. And I think that's beautiful for people to know. And then as a final, you were finalizing the manuscript, and Ronni, your daughter, sent a Instagram post from Jabby App, and I love this. It said, never underestimate a cycle breaker. Not only did they experience years of generational trauma, but they stood in the face of the trauma and fought to say, this ends with me. This is brave. This is powerful. This comes at a significant cost. Never underestimate a cycle breaker. That it was beautiful.
Yeah, it made us both cry. And in fact, initially, when we were thinking about titling the book, we had titled it "It Ends with Us."
Mm-hmm.
This ends with us. So we were sort of working with that title, and but then we thought, we want to actually turn that around and make it positive, because we were motivated by, like, we got to stop this, we got to break this cycle. But it's like, okay, then what are we moving toward? Because you can stop drinking, but then you are just a dry drunk if you don't have an active recovery process, right? So, okay, we can say we're not going to hit our children. We can say we're not going to scream at them and tell them how terrible they are. But what are we going to do? Are we going to nurture the beautiful little lights that they are? And so what's the positive piece of that? And how do we move forward? And one of the things we just felt really strongly about was that we read a lot in the recovery literature, and there's a lot of great work now looking at childhood trauma, intergenerational trauma, adverse childhood experiences. People call it different things. Excellent work out there. But what we don't see a lot of discussion about is the sibling relationship and the negative impact that these dynamics in abusive and addictive homes have on the siblings, and how people can grow up and dislike each other or hate each other's guts for their entire lives, not realizing it's not their fault. Their parents pitted them against each other. And so we felt like that was what we wanted to bring to the table. We wanted people to maybe hear about our story and think, wow, I have a sibling that I don't get along with very well. Maybe it has nothing to do with us. Maybe it has to do with how our parents treated us and how what they told us about each other. Because we know our mother used to lie like a rug about us. And it wasn't until we started talking to each other that we discovered that. And boy, she was not happy when she realized we were talking to each other. She knew the jig was up, that she wasn't going to be in control for much longer. So
yeah, I speak with a lot of people who are going through the sibling, and this is a great book, definitely for them to look at, because when you are available to be able to chat with each other and take on, be intimate in your conversations, a lot open. And there's a threat, there's a fear that happens within the structure of family at times. It's like, oh, all the, alliances are shifting. And when the alliances shift, obviously anxiety goes higher again. And it's as if like, oh, the whole structure of the family might crumble. And it doesn't. And even if it crumbles, great. It gets rebuilt in a whole new different way when there's a healing actually happening.
Yes.
Healing begins with us breaking the cycle of trauma and abuse and rebuilding the sibling bond by Ronni Tichenor and Jennie Weaver. 1 minute, anything we have not touched upon that you must tell our audience.
I would just quickly say, learn to trust your inner guidance, learn to trust your heart, because it is your higher self, your intuition, and it is guiding you to the best life that you can live.
Yes. Okay, last words from you, Ronni.
Oh, I think that's absolutely right, is that when you are raised in a home with addiction and abuse, you learn to be very vigilant to try to keep yourself safe, but you are told that what you're experiencing isn't really happening, right? So there's a lot of gaslighting that goes on. So people often are disconnected from their own inner wisdom. So I would just echo what Jennie said, how important it is to reconnect and trust yourself.
Thank you so much for taking the time to be with me and our audience. Thank you, Jennie. Thank you, Ronni. It was a great, great conversation, amazing book. And I hope that it brings the siblings closer together and brings the whole family closer together when we have the courage to open up, share, release, clean up, and heal, and then, reconnect and reconcile. And everybody who's out there, thank you so much for being with us. Create an amazing life for yourself and everyone around you. And until next week, bye-bye.